name is Nick Perrett. I'm the CEO of an investment platform called Prosper. The reason that we do these events, because you're thinking, why is this hosted by an investment company? All of our members are super interested and excited in things that might change the way the world is in the next 20 or 30 years. So we host these events to help people think about things that are going to change the way we live. And obviously, AI is one of those extremely exciting things that is going to change the world or is changing the world right now. And I actually had I'm stealing a quote from your book.
By all means.
Just because I thought it sort of summed up. So Verity said, understanding technology, how it gets built, why and by whom is critical for anyone interested in the future of our society. I thought that just sort of summed up why we decided to do this event, why Verity is such an exciting person to have. So Verity, before we jump into the book, Verity is, you have one of the most incredible CVs for someone of your age. You're much younger than me, but you seem to have been to every famous university on planet Earth, as far as I can tell, which is pretty impressive. And also advising businesses, working in Google DeepMind, advising governments, so the OECD and the cabinet, and winning numerous awards. Power Women in City AM as well. Apparently, you were. According to Wikipedia.
Okay.
So lots of
believe
things.
Everything you read on
So
Wikipedia.
a very talented lady here with us today. I guess a book is a massive undertaking, and having read it, it sort of feels like you're sort of a gift of everything that you've experienced in life. What made you think I'm going to write a book, given that it's a massive thing to do?
Yeah, it is. But I really enjoyed doing it, I think, because I hadn't had time in a long time to actually sit down and reflect and, to get it all on paper. As you say, I've kind of been very lucky to be at the forefront of the recent AI revolution over the past kind of decade, but, in high levels of politics before that, and sort of watching this technological change happen and how that affects politics. And I sort of had this relatively unique ability to speak in both those languages and see how those things all tie together to impact all of us. And so I wanted to write it because I had this in my mind that I would sort of be able to share everything I knew with a much broader group of people if I wrote it in a book, rather than advising companies or governments or individuals. I also kind of wanted to bring this historical perspective to it. So I, actually originally trained as a historian, and even though I then went into politics and technology, I still remain interested in history for the reasons that I always was, in that we have so much to learn about the future from the past. And the tech industry is not known for its humility. We kind of like to think that everything we're doing is the first time anyone's ever done it. And, it comes from a good place. It comes from a place of, excitement and wanting to innovate and move forward. But it does mean sometimes that recognizing that other people have been here before and may have something to learn from them, that sometimes gets lost. And it was my sort of hypothesis that, of course, while AI is new, technology is not new and innovation is not new. So I figured we must be able to learn something from the history of transformative technologies, because, of course, we have been in moments of great technological transformation before, and we have dealt with that as a society, some places better than others. What can we learn and what can we take away from that? And once I started doing the research, it was really clear that the answer to that was loads. There's lots that we could learn. So combining all of those aspects of sort of my background together in something that tried to sort of demystify AI, make it more accessible to people. And then since I kind of started writing it, which was, a while back, we've sort of entered a new wave of AI hype. And unfortunately, that's come alongside some gatekeeping and some sense that, this is something to be feared. And if you don't understand it, there's not really a place for you in the conversation. But actually, again, because of my political background, because of these looking at this historical research, it's really clear to me that if we want a really good outcome with AI, which we have every chance of getting if we want, then more people need to be involved,
Yeah.
not
I think
less.
I think that broadening comes through loud and clear in the book in terms of your mission felt very strongly that you want this to come out of the little technology box
Yeah.
that it sits in and permeate through society. And you cover a number of stories in the book, historical. So I always think of, yeah, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. That old quote that no one knows if it's actually Mark Twain or not. But you're pulling on some threads. So the first thread that I thought was really insightful and really interesting for the audience was this notion that you can have global cooperation
Mm,
um, and not a global competition
mm.
in terms of AI. And you see it in the press: AI wars, America v China.
AI arms race.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And even the language is quite weaponized.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So the sort of three examples that I go through in the book are the space race, IVF and human embryology research, and then the internet. Um, the first example, and each kind of brings different lessons and focuses on a different aspect of AI where I think it can particularly illuminate us. And the first example is the space race, which I think is really fascinating, not for the tech itself, even though obviously it was an incredible technical achievement, but actually it was an incredible diplomatic and legal achievement as well. Because when Neil Armstrong sets foot on the moon, he does so legally as a representative of all of humankind first and of America second. And even though he plants or they plant an American flag on the moon, they do not claim the moon or for America. They do not own the moon. Again, legally, nobody owns the moon. And this has been decided. These are decisions that were taken deliberately in the UN and sanctified, ratified in a UN treaty of 1967. When they leave, and by the way, just take a moment, think, yeah, of course no one owns the moon. But actually, we're sat here in a country that used to put a lot of flags in a lot
Yeah.
of places and claim them as their own. So it's quite an extraordinary thing to not do that and decide in advance not to do that. Given also that the space race did emerge from war. And what I'm really clear about in the book is that there is there is room for both kind of, national interest and global interest. And while the space race and the attempt to go to the moon emerges from a sense of deciding to want to beat the Soviets at something. It's not that there was any other reason to go, and Kennedy is very explicit about that. It's a bit in the book where I write about the conversations he was having in the Oval Office, where he's saying, I'm not that interested in space. Like, why aren't we spending all this money on cancer research or desalinating water? We're doing it because we've made it a test of power, and so we have to win. It's a really extraordinary kind of, real politic. But in the end, for a combination of reasons that I write about, but including being very chastened by the Cuban Missile Crisis and how close the world came to war, Kennedy goes to the UN and says, let's be sure that space is a place of sort of scientific freedom and nobody will own the moon, and maybe there should be a joint mission with the Soviet Union. Obviously, sadly, he's then murdered, but this does get ratified into a treaty so that they get to the moon, and as they leave a little plaque that says we came in peace for all mankind. And if you unpack all bits of that, it's all decided in advance. We came in peace, not in war. We're not leaving behind weapons pointing down. We now, all of us, don't have nuclear weapons orbiting above us because of decisions that were taken actively then. And for all mankind, again, it's in the treaty that space will be, quote, the province of all mankind. There's self-interested aspects of this. There are some cynical bits. There are parts of space that are still militarized. There's many cynical things you can push back on to say, well. But the truth is, the International Space Station now is a place where Ukrainian and Russian cosmonauts shook hands when their countries were at war. There's something special that was decided in advance and throughout the course of the space technological revolution that has led us in a much better place than we otherwise would be today. Maybe still not perfect, but in a better place than we other would be. And so what I say in the book is the fact that this treaty exists at all at a time of deep global tension and conflict is really remarkable. And are we seeing the same thing with AI? And if not, why not? And of course, we're not seeing the same
No.
thing, as you say.
Mm.
We're seeing this AI arms race narrative, this, it's US or China, somebody has to win. As I say in the book, AI is not a battle to be won. It's why I don't like the atomic bomb analogy. This is a technology that has the potential, if we decide to move forward with purpose, to bring huge advantages to the whole planet, but it also has potential to do great harm. And we have to really decide very carefully which way we want it to go. And then we have to actively shape it in that direction, because you're not going to just make the world a better place by accident. You have to sort of actively try. And sometimes I think lately, the last maybe, a few years, that there has been a sense that technology in and of itself would just make the world better. And that was certainly part of the reason I got into the technology industry, is because I was so attracted to this
Mm.
notion that we can improve things through innovation. And you can, but it has to be very, very purposeful. So I think now, with this arms race narrative that we have, it's intentional. And there could be a different way. We could be talking, while of course still making sure that democratic nations are leading in AI technology.
Mm.
We could be galvanizing, we could be attempting to uplift, and we could be attempting to have a narrative for AI and climate, or AI and uh, diagnostics, to AI for tackling diseases, AI for all sorts of different things. But we're not seeing people, leaders internationally, geopolitically, galvanize around that. We're seeing them galvanize around the sense that AI is some big fight that needs to be won out between one place or the other. And I think that's unhelpful. And there is another way, as shown in the book.
Where do you see that leadership potentially coming from?
We have seen elements, not to be completely down on it.
Yeah.
I've been involved in geopolitical conversations in my career, the G7 level, and the OECD. The OECD, we crafted the first sort of set of intergovernmental principles on AI. And you're also seeing different groups work together. The EU are working together on their AI Act. So there is more energy around that discussion. But really, we need the US and China to get together. And we also need to recognize the extremely important role of other nations, which sounds like two contradictory things, but actually they're not.
Mm.
So I kind of, it's disappointing to see that there's been no cooperation on even very narrow areas. As I say in the book, we could just decide to cooperate on something like lethal autonomous weapons systems, which is something we can all agree is bad. We can all agree we don't want. And just like in the space race, there can be agreement. Or we have nuclear weapons agreements, we have chemical weapons agreements, we have biological weapons agreements. So there could be even just some narrow aspect that we decide that's the area where we're going to aim for global cooperation, because global cooperation on all of AI is not going to be possible nor desirable. But if we just even pick out some areas and focus on them, like with the space treaty, okay, it's actually very lofty and kind of inspirational, but in some sense it's very light. It's a very short treaty. It doesn't cover a bunch of things. Didn't anticipate that private individuals would soon be sending rockets into space. So it doesn't account for that. It doesn't account for the proliferation of sort of space debris that's sort of orbiting around us. But just because it doesn't do everything doesn't mean it isn't worthwhile that it did something. So I think we can actually be pragmatic and realistic about where we can see cooperation and still have that sort of sense of purpose and vision.
Have you seen anything specifically with China? Because if anything, that with the recent news around chips not being sent to China, that kind of thing seems to be going in reverse.
Yes, well, they're tied. I mean, if you sort of create a narrative that is that this is a technology that needs to be weaponized and is a competition, then you're going to very quickly get to the kinds of outcomes that you see with the CHIPS Act. But the new project that I've started at Cambridge, which is called the AI and Geopolitics Project, is about trying to put forward and galvanize people around new narratives that are based on sort of cooperation and collaboration rather than sort of competition and antagonism. But it's not just at the political level. I mean, there are scientists who are, you know, European and American and Chinese scientists all working together on aspects of AI safety. They call that track two diplomacy. So there are people making an effort, but I would love to see the most powerful people in the world make more of an effort.
So on the subject of scientists collaborating, you talk about IVF, and I think that one, the thing that struck me that was interesting was that you can create an environment where there are guardrails around innovation, but you can still let innovation flourish.
Yeah.
Do you want to unpack that?
Yeah, thank you. The second example is around IVF, which, we all just take for granted as a completely normal, accepted part of life now. But back in the 80s, when I'm writing about the first baby born through IVF was 1978 in the north of England. And after kind of an initial outpouring of joy, especially in the UK, because it was kind of British science and Britain had a pretty rough ride in the 70s, so people were kind of excited about it. Quite quickly, it became very controversial. And a lot of the kind of media narrative and public concern chimes quite a lot with some of the stuff we see around AI at the moment. Sort of, where is this going? Where will it lead? What does it mean to be human? Combined with increased capabilities in genetic editing, for example, there was a kind of a sense that, like, will we be creating a super race, of humans in future? And, this kind of narrative, again, something we see quite similar to the narratives around AI at the moment. And a problem we have, I think, in AI today is there's a great deal of reluctance to regulate anywhere, partly for fear of this. That's partly where this narrative of geopolitical competition feeds in, but also in the sense that it's too new to do anything. And while I agree with that to a great extent, this is new, there are still things you can do. So if you look back at this IVF example, there's lots of concern. Politician writes to Margaret Thatcher, who's prime minister at the time, and says, you need to look at this, basically. And they say, we don't know what to do. It's new. So we're going to set up a commission. And the commission, I mean, you can set up a commission. I joke about this in the book and just like set up a commission, so we don't have to think about it anymore. But this commission is actually, they find somebody to lead it who has experience in this kind of thing before. She's actually a philosopher rather than a scientist, which I think is really important. And the commission itself is multidisciplinary. They have legal scholars, social workers, biologists, representatives of the religious community, because that was a big component in the discussion. All over the country, take hundreds of submissions, loads and loads of work, and they come up with this, amongst other different recommendations, they come up with a proposed solution to this particular area of controversy, which is around research happening on human embryos, which people are really uncomfortable with. They say you can do it up to 14 days only, and then no more. It's a 14-day rule. And the scientists actually push back on that and say, well, it's ridiculous. It's not rational. Again, I can really recognize that from my experience of trying to talk about tech policy regulation now. It's like, well, if you can't explain exactly, technically, rationally, exactly why you're drawing the line there, then you shouldn't. But Mary Warnock, who's the philosopher that runs the commission, her point, and I really believe in this too, is people in a democracy expect and deserve to have their opinion listened to. And if they feel uncomfortable with where something's going and you just let it go there, you're going to erode trust in the science completely in a way that's ultimately detrimental to the progress of that science. And when the scientists pushed back, including, I think I quote in the book, like article in Nature, editorial in Nature magazine that's like very thinly veiled sexism, calling her hysterical and stuff like this. Enoch Powell rears his ugly head, and it's amazing. It's a really remarkable, because you think, God, 85, he's still knocking about. Yeah, he's still knocking about. He's still in Parliament. He aligns with anti-abortion activists and tries to ban human embryology research altogether. And he nearly succeeds. The majority of Conservative MPs support him. Even Margaret Thatcher seems like she supports him. And through a great deal of work, which I talk about in the book, from Mary Warnock and her commission and the scientists who quickly realized that maybe they should have aligned with the 14-day rule afterwards, because some research is better than none, come together. And 5 years later, they pass a piece of legislation, which is has made the UK the global gold standard for regulation in this type of biotech. And we have a flourishing life sciences sector, multi-billion pound life sciences sector. It's one of our leading industries in the UK. So that kind of targeted, limited, bespoke regulation didn't damage the innovation. If anything, it allowed it to flourish in a much kinder, less heated political environment. If you look at the US, where this didn't happen, IVF is potentially maybe about to be banned in Alabama. George W. Bush banned stem cell research. Obama comes in and unbans it. It's been a continuing source of sort of political controversy that we have avoided. And obviously there are cultural reasons as well, but I do think a huge amount of that is due to the fact that people like Mary Warnock and others said, we have to think about society when we do this. And if we set limits, then within that, we will be able to, innovation will be able to flourish.
And on that group of people around IVF, the diversity of thought and the backgrounds of all the people were very, very broad. You talk right at the beginning about the sort of techno elite still being in too much of a bubble potentially. But are there any things that you're seeing in AI where there's more proactivity about diversity of thought? I mean, I guess hiring you is one step, historian.
Yes, that's always the answer.
Do you see other things, broader things going on in terms of diversity of opinion? Are there philosophers working at Meta?
I joke, but the fact that DeepMind wanted to bring me on to set up a ethics and policy unit right from the earliest stages, I think is a testament to Demis, who's the founder and CEO, his understanding that this technology was, societally important, transformative, and required a wider input. And so, yes, I hired philosophers, I hired social scientists, policy people, and we did a lot of work trying to reach out and work with different perspectives. And there are other companies that started to do that after we did, and I think there has been a kind of community of people in AI looking at this stuff from sort of diverse perspectives that's heartening. I think the problem more recently is that now we're in like I went through kind of one AI hype cycle, and now we're in another one. It's kind of a bit like a gold rush now. And so the first thing that can go sometimes is that sort of consideration, not necessarily from the people who have been thinking like that already, but there's kind of been a rush of new people desperate to make a quick buck. And I think that sometimes undermines some of that thoughtfulness that's gone into it. But you definitely are seeing, I think both OpenAI and Meta have done calls out for input into sort of direct democracy and deliberative democracy when it comes to their systems, which is great. I mean, but the thing is that can all only be complementary to actual democracy. And a problem is that what I say in the book is that technology just reflects society. So we usually think about technology as deciding what happens, so the Industrial Revolution, the spinning jenny comes along and that changes. And of course, there's an element of that, but also what gets built, who gets funded and who doesn't, what society embraces and what it doesn't, what we use and what we don't. There's a reason electric cars were tried years ago and didn't work, and it's back. These things also are so deeply affected by the culture of the time because, they're not built in a vacuum, they're contextual. And what are we, if that's true, then, which I believe that it is, and I believe the research shows, then it means AI is going to reflect society now. And what is society now? We're very divided, we're very polarized, very distrustful of institutions, and pretty unequal, huge wealth disparities. And so AI is kind of holding a mirror up to us, I think. And we're seeing a load of money rush into the industry, which is not necessarily being distributed widely, but probably making a few already wealthy people wealthier. People are already not sure who to trust or what to trust or if you can trust anything. We have huge conspiracy theories online that lead to people storming the Capitol in America. And so we've got AI that's encourage, like undermining even further that sense of truth. Like, would we be able to cope better and manage better with generative AI and this concept of deep fakes if we were not a society already deeply divided and distrustful of each other, if our defenses weren't kind of worn so low?
Does it worry you that sort of an American hegemony, very powerful companies control most of this today, control the
It's
money?
interesting. I mean, look, I worked at Google for a really long time. I obviously, thought and think it's a great company, and I enjoyed being there. I think there's great people there, and I think they're often very thoughtful about what they do. But there's no doubt that there's a huge discomfort from the fact that this very powerful technology, which, by the way, the tech industry are telling people is really powerful.
Yeah.
It's not like, everyone's just sort of gone after them. They have been out there saying this is a transformative technology, this will change everything, freaking everybody out. Not all of them, but a lot, freaking everybody out. And it's no surprise then that people say, wow, gosh, that's terrifying. Why are you controlling it then? Why don't so I think there's absolutely legitimate concern around that. And the answer to that would be strong scrutiny and strong accountability, but people are not seeing that, I think, often from their politicians. I have choice words for some elements of the tech industry in there, don't get me wrong, and I think there's definitely a culture in Silicon Valley. And by Silicon Valley, I don't mean big tech, I just mean that kind of Silicon Valley world and mindset. There's definitely some real problems with that that deserve that kind of scrutiny and accountability, and we need to hold to account. But sometimes it's like, it's not the technologist's fault for going around talking about how great their technology is. It's really on us and our representatives and our institutions to be able to handle that in a way that we feel comfortable with, just like people were able to feel comfortable with what happened with the Mary Warnock Commission and IVF. So that's why it's kind of a reflection of the time we're in. I think people already don't feel like their politicians have got anything under control, so they don't trust them to get AI under control. And indeed, if you take this country, Rishi Sunak said to everybody this was a potentially extinction level technology, which I don't agree with, but some people do. And then he said, but we're not going to regulate, we're going to wait and see. Well, you're not giving people much confidence.
That's awful in some ways. Do you think that there's any chance that the UK specifically, I know you said we should be thinking about global solutions, but a national interest, is there anything any path you see to the UK having an IVF sort of level of influence by getting on top of this?
We have lots of AI talent. We have a great AI industry. We have great universities. We do have good institutions. No matter what might happen here or there, we are a more cohesive society than the US. And so I think we have a huge potential as a country to play a leading role. And I've been arguing that sort of privately and publicly for years. Unfortunately, around the last kind of big AI hype cycle that we saw was kind of 2016, 17. My old company, DeepMind, had this program, AlphaGo
time,
which kind of set off a lot of excitement. It's kind of the chat GPT of its day, in terms of the hype that it caused, or the interest. And then in 2017, Xi Jinping said he was going to make China an AI superpower by 2030, and then the Americans kind of reacted. So we had this kind of notion. And myself and others were kind of encouraging the UK to play a kind of sensible moderating role then. But the UK had chosen to do Brexit, and so the government was focused elsewhere. At the same time, the US had chosen to do Trump. And so withdrawing from international institutions.
Yeah.
And so what we did see really encouragingly was the Canadians and the French, who had these back-to-back G7 presidencies and sort of shared language, and they came together to really push forward, but they just didn't get like the input from the US and the others that were needed. And the UK were involved in that, and they have really good people in the civil service. So they have definitely been there as a player, but there's no doubt that, the EU Act is what, companies I talk to, they're all asking about the EU AI Act. And we didn't have any influence over that. And the current government has chosen to go quite heavily down the sort of existential risk route. So in terms of giving clarity currently to businesses and kind of playing that big role internationally, they have tried to play a big role internationally through the summit, and I think putting some energy and effort behind that was great, and it's really pleasing to see that. Really pleasing to see that they invited China and didn't allow themselves to kind of be bullied out of doing that. So I definitely commend that. But there would need to be sort of much longer and more joined up, kind of a longer strategy that's joined up and pushed for a long time, whereas actually it's been constantly changing over the past kind of 10 years because of other events going on.
That's a shame. Any quick fixes?
Um, I say in the book that, if there is a new government in the UK soon, I think they can. I don't think you can do a commission like the Warnock Commission on all of AI.
No.
AI is just obviously an umbrella term for a bunch of different things, some very benign, and no one even thinks of them as AI anymore. But no one's too bothered about, I don't care about AI recommending me a song to watch or, a TV. I mean, I get annoyed a bit because it thinks that because I listened to the Beatles yesterday, I want to listen to the Beatles every single day of my life from now on. And Spotify only shows me that. I'm like, I do, but I also have quite a weird taste in music and I listen to this stuff.
Perhaps not as important as autonomous weapons.
But I don't mind. It annoys me, but I don't need the government to get involved. But maybe a commission on different, more concerning aspects of AI, maybe AI, even AI in public services or AI in labor or AI and weapons wouldn't be something that you could do purely as the UK. But there's lots of places where I think the UK could still take a role if they're kind of very deliberate about it. And they, at the moment, they are trying to do that in this very long-term safety aspect.
I'm conscious of time and no one in the audience has had a chance to say anything. Has anyone got questions for Verity?
One of the things that I think is quite different and challenging about AI today is that I think a lot of the progress is not being invented as such, but almost being discovered. Like there's a lot about where we're going, where we don't really know how good this technology could get. Whereas I think some of the other use cases and situations you've described, there's almost a use case that people are working towards. How do you think that might change things and make it and introduce challenges into kind of what you're talking about in terms of cooperation and stuff?
Yeah, I don't agree, actually. I think it seems that way in retrospect, that there was obviously always, but IVF emerged from decades of research into sort of breeding between farm animals for the purposes of agricultural production. The space race and the decisions made around that emerged from, a long history of like weapons, basically, and I open the book with the story of the V2 bomb that lands in Lewisham and kills over 100 people, including many children. The V2, this is Hitler's vengeance weapon in World War II, and in the Blitz causes great damage. And the V2 was the first technology that went into outer space. And in the case of that we haven't got to talk about it yet, but my final case study is the internet, which I split into the internet pre and post 9/11 and tell the story of the internet from the sort of 50s through to 2016. And there's almost too much to talk about there because so many different permutations and so many different things happen. But that emerges very much as sort of one type of small bit of research within the Department of Defense after they're tasked by Eisenhower to look for weapons of the future. And it, emerges today as the sort of underpinning of AI. So I don't think any of the technologies we've seen in the past, or certainly like this example, start with a kind of obvious use case. I think they are all invented by people for deliberate reasons. There's a really fascinating book that I quote a lot in my book by John Agar, who's a professor at King's, who talks about the concept of working worlds and how technology is developed for either, for war or for business and how it happens. That is really, for me and my research, really clearly the case. And AI is no different. You have sort of, I'll get the stats wrong now, but it's something like 1 in 5 computer science graduates now focuses on AI. And of those, like 2/3 go into private industry. So that is AI for the tech industry. So that is AI for products and services, for ad tech, for for whatever those companies do. So it is really being invented with a purpose, and it's not something that people are just stumbling on by accident. That's almost never the case. The kind of notion of someone tinkering away and then just accidentally coming up with penicillin is actually, like, very, very rare. It's usually for a purpose. And I think it's empowering for us to know that, because once you realize that this is all being invented and funded and pushed for a purpose, you get to realize that actually we do have a somewhat of a say in that if we kind of use our voice.
One of the things that freaks out lay people, and by that I mean myself, about AI is this combination of its incredible scope and power combined into a black box that we can't see into. And black boxes tend not to have positive connotations, like plane disasters, Pandora holding them, etc. And you can kind of, your mind goes to the worst case scenario. Where's that all going to go if we have no control or understanding of why AI does what it does, or eventually if that turns out to be the case. But is that the case? Is it actually the case that we have no ability to interrogate why AI does a certain thing and then manipulate that for, reasons of regulation, self-preservation, et cetera, That's the bit that I'm sort of really unclear on. I think there's a lot of noise around.
Yeah, there is, yeah. Yeah, no, it isn't the case, but the reason you feel freaked out is because you're being freaked out. I mean, it's intentional. If I sit here now and instead of saying, don't worry, it's okay, say, it's not okay. This is the most powerful technology that's ever coming. Trust me, I'm from AI. I'm from the world of AI. I know. Nothing like this has ever happened before in human history, and we've got no idea where it's going to go because it's a black box. That accrues power to me. Because then you're all like, oh my God, that's absolutely terrifying. Well, it's good that you seem to know, so you should get on with it. If you're terrified, you're disengaged, and that's purposeful. There's a lot of people, there's other books that come out and say AI is terrifying, and that's on purpose to frighten you. If you're frightened, you're disengaged, and that accrues power to the person that's done the frightening. And that is just not my experience or what the research says from the history of humanity. We have always been able to take transformative technologies and harness them and work with them and manage them. Doesn't mean things don't go wrong. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't mean that it's always perfect and everything goes brilliantly and there aren't serious concerns that are raised. But the notion that AI is an all-powerful, multi-purpose technology that the people building it don't even understand because it's a black box and there's nothing we can do, that is an intentional narrative which benefits a certain group of people, usually the people saying it. I want to caveat that with the fact that there are some people who believe this very deeply, have worked in the industry, have worked in the science for a long time, and feel very strongly that they're worried about where this might go. And I don't cast any aspersions on their motives. I know a lot of those people personally, and I think they are doing really hard work to really get the best out of this technology. My team used to work very closely with people working on that kind of long-term safety, and we worked together. They prioritized this, we prioritized that, we worked together, we talked. The problem with what's happening now is people are trying to split those people into two camps, that you have to sort of pick one or the other. Either you believe it is this world-changing, potentially humanity extinction-causing, revolutionary, unlike anything else in history, superintelligence, or you think that that's all rubbish. And actually, it's much more important for all of those groups to sort of calmly and reasonably and practically work together where they can. And lots of people are doing that. But some of the people now trying to deliberately freak people out and deliberately make AI seem like this sort of unique technology in all of human history, I think get a lot of benefit out of doing that. And I'm trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to demystify it. I'm trying to say, we have done this before, we can do it again, but that requires more people to get involved in AI, more people to switch on and not switch off. That kind of 60s phrase, tune in, turn on and drop out. It's like we need to do the opposite of that. Stay really alive and alert to it as much as you can in whatever way that makes sense to you. It's not that every single person needs to quit and become an AI expert, but AI is in all of our lives already, and it will continue to be. And I'm trying to reassure people that just because you're not a deep technical expert in AI doesn't mean that your opinion on where that's going isn't valid, that what you think about what should happen, what shouldn't, isn't valid, that your opinion on all of this stuff matters less because you haven't got a PhD in machine learning. Actually, it's the opposite. All different types of perspectives and expertise. You might not be an expert at AI, but I bet you are an expert at something. And because AI is this pervasive technology that is coming into all different aspects, that thing that you're expert at will also be important in terms of guiding and making sure that this ends up in the right place. It's not actually that the people who are building it are the ones that are going to get to decide everything. If anything, it's how people are using it, responding to it, integrating it, regulating it, managing it. That's how we're going to work out how this technology actually emerges.
It seems like, certainly at my age, that the world hasn't been this polarized in a very, very long time, right? And obviously, there are a certain amount of people that benefit from that, right? We can think about somebody who's coming up for election right now. Anyway, the point is, I don't think everybody's like that. There are people in the world like yourself who do realize the importance of humanities for science. I went to university in Canada, and I went to university in Canada quite a long time ago. And even from that period of time, the late 80s, early 90s, if you were studying medicine, if you were studying tech, if you were studying business, you had to study ethics, you had to study philosophy as well. And that was from the very beginning. Granted, they've got a way more Scandi vision of the world than possibly their American neighbors, but it's always been part of it. So it was very interesting that you said, likewise, that it was the Canadians who were talking to the French, trying to put something in place. So I would like to, again, the same as you, say there's never been a more important time, I think, for humanities to be brought back to the table in all these discussions, as opposed to where some of our political leaders are trying to cut down on arts, and we all need to just study maths, and maths is very important. I say that as a former financial journalist, but humanities is too, and should be at the table with all of these discussions.
Absolutely.
Love the book, by the way. It's really good. I mean, the combination of history, policy, because there's obviously a session around policy, and AI, which is the core subject, and the fact that it's more of a cultural perspective, I think, is really good. But as I listen to the conversation, it sort of feels like how we could be discussing the invention of electricity, and that did Edison do something brilliant by taking something like the light bulb? There were so many things you could do with electricity, but take the light bulb as the way of demonstrating the power of this, but the advantage of it. Because of your three stories, I think the most obvious advantage was the IVF. Like the reason that couple had IVF is because her husband had children. She wanted to have children, but she couldn't have children. So there was a really great purpose there. So and you talk about purpose at the end as well. It's like, but you said we need to find that purpose, but we haven't actually, isn't that the challenge, that we need to sort out what that purpose is? And I guess I would love to hear from you in this room, just kept to this room, just in your mind, what could be some of the sort of key purposes that we could focus in on that would actually demonstrate the advantage to people, and who should lead that?
You're right. I talk about this towards the end of the book, that why are you building this? Why are you building this technology? And I sort of challenge the people building AI technology to say, if you can't articulate the vision that you have, and then why are you rushing headlong into something that you're not sure what you're actually building? I think there are potential places that we could have a vision and a purpose for AI that kind of uplift and inspire people in a tangible way. Because I think that's really your point, is like, something that's actually tangible that actually helps people. And I would love to see us more focused on that. And that's why I got into AI in the first place, because I was very interested in what tech could do for us and how we could innovate to sort of make the world better. Uh, and I've been disappointed, I think, over the past few years to see that there hasn't been that sort of galvanizing energy. The best example I can give is it comes from my old employer, but I don't say it as a former DeepMind employee. I genuinely think the most exciting use of machine learning that we've seen was a DeepMind program called AlphaFold, which is about protein folding. And I would explain it. It would take me too long, and I would explain it badly. But it's a tool designed to help unlock a piece of the kind of biological puzzle that is holding back innovation, holding back biologists. It takes them so long. It's not always easy to do this process, and we've been able to just speed that up and open source it in a way that I think will kind of end up being the foundation for loads of exciting things that come from it. I think the vision of AI for science is one that you can sort of get your mind around and get your head behind, something that can take huge amounts of, we have all this data now, but our brains aren't capable of spotting patterns in all that data. So what are we doing with all of it? Or what if we have a tool to help us? What we can take all the research from Cancer Research UK, and we can have a program that can help spot patterns, those kinds of things. And so what I would love to see is more effort from companies, governments, sort of galvanizing people around those aims, so we can actually get a result that is tangible for people. President Biden, back when he was vice president, he had a moonshot for cancer, which is about trying to drive towards a cure. I don't know if there's plenty, but there are ways in which AI might be able to help at different aspects of this, including early diagnostics, which we know it can do very well. So why are we not seeing a moonshot for AI and cancer? Why are we not? The government doesn't have the same amount of money to spend, or the US government does, but most governments don't have the same amount of money to spend that the big companies have. But why aren't we seeing governments use their convening power to get people in the room to charge towards a goal like that? Instead, we're seeing kind of that divisive approach, which sort of supports and propels a scary narrative around AI. So I think this kind of idea of having a vision and for a positive future, and then pushing people towards, and then in pushing towards that in a way that engenders trust, is just completely missing at the moment. The only other area, just to say quickly, is years ago, 5 years ago maybe, there was a paper that came out from a bunch of AI scientists saying, here's the ways we think that AI could help with the climate crisis. I haven't seen anything come from that since. But there's potential that it might. When I was at DeepMind, we were doing work on cooling down data centers to decrease their carbon footprint. The UK government, to be fair, set up an AI for decarbonisation fund, but it was 1.5 million. I mean, you basically can't buy a NVIDIA chip for that these days. So we're just not seeing
Magic.
we're just not seeing the vision. And I think that's a reflection of where we are. I mean, we're pretty, there's a pretty, it's kind of a dearth of vision and inspirational leadership at the moment in general. But if we sort of demand that and ask for it, I think we have to, when we think about AI, and I say in the book, like, AI needs you, get involved. And there's all sorts of ways you can get involved with your employer or with your own business or your kid's school, or you can write to your local democratically elected representative and say, what do you think about this? And at least force them to have an opinion. But I think it's incumbent on us to also ask for more vision as well. It's not just that we don't want AI here, although there's plenty of areas that I don't want to see AI, and I don't think it's ready and maybe never be ready. But also I want to see more of it here. Please try and think about that. I've been talking about, we have a National Health Service, and that came out of the horror of the war, right? Well, there's been a lot of horror recently, and maybe a national energy service might be good too. And there's plenty of ways I could see AI helping that, but there's just not that kind of level of thinking around AI. It's all become pretty money focused and sort of siloed off and competitive, and it's not inspirational.
I think on the NHS one in particular, the only thing that really I remember being picked up was a negative storyline. It was like, they've taken all the data. You
Oh yeah,
remember
but I just meant that the vision of Bevan to create the NHS.
Oh, right. Okay.
That was an incredible vision.
Yeah.
To create a national health service, using the fact we had new technology, we had different progress in society. We now have new technology that might make renewable energy more viable. And maybe we might one day be able to get to a version where, energy is free at the point of use. So I don't know, but like there's some innovation to be done then. And it needs to be that order of magnitude of like, we had to create a whole NHS to make people's lives better. I just feel that we need to think, what kind of society do we want? And what sort of society are we trying to build? And how can AI help us get there? And instead, we're having, let's just build AI for the sake of it. And then society just has to deal with that. But back in one sort of thing that brings this home to me is back in 2017, the Royal Society did some research. They kind of did polling across members of the public to talk to them about AI. Lots of different things. What did they understand about AI? But one of the things they asked people to do is kind of stack rank where they were excited about AI and where they weren't. And people were excited about AI in sort of healthcare, actually. Yeah. And what was bottom of the list, where they just didn't care, didn't want to see it, there was no societal desire for it? AI art. Because no one's like super keen to see the artists replaced, like, oh, less of those pesky artists, And what do we
That's
have?
what we've got.
With billions going into AI art. And it's not that it's not a cool tool. I think it's cool. I think it's cool too, but it's just, it's hardly like get you out of bed in the morning with joy, is it?
I remember reading something that I can't remember the lady's name, and she was saying, I wanted AI so that I could spend more time doing my art, and I wanted it to do my washing up. It was kind of, yeah. And unfortunately, I've got the other way around, where I'm doing the washing up and it's doing the art for me.
Yeah, it's a good example.
I know there was a question over there.
My first question was, what do you suggest that people like us in this room, and indeed much wider society, do to make our voices heard about where the direction these things should be going in? But then you've explained some of that.
Yeah.
So how do you suggest the public are educated enough to be able to comment? Because I've done a bit of learning and so on about it, but I would be very reluctant to say anything because...
Well, loads. So you shouldn't feel reluctant. I mean, that's...
exactly.
I really think that actually you don't need to know that much about it. It's... I'm not asking everyone to have kind of a great sweeping vision of AI over the next few years, but whatever your area of expertise is, AI will affect in some way, and you will have just as much, if not much more, actually, of a educated opinion on how it's going to affect your particular industry or your particular life. I mean, if you think about, because there are these issues with AI in the future, and they're important, but AI is here now. And there's a lot of people who are sort of living in that dystopian future already that we're kind of worried about. If you are a delivery driver for certain companies right now, don't know if it's the case here, but certainly in the US, I mentioned one of them in the book, you have a live facial recognition camera on you the whole time you're working to monitor your facial expressions, sensors so that you know whether you're plugged into a seatbelt or not, sensors so they can tell how fast you press down on the brake, timers, and GPS to make sure you're delivering your packages on time all the time. You are living in a sort of 24/7 surveilled workplace already. If you are in a high crime neighborhood in the US, you might already be dealing with predictive policing, which is known to be incredibly biased and incredibly problematic. Najir Parks is a Black man in America, I can't remember the state, who was arrested and imprisoned because facial recognition technology identified him as at the scene of a crime that he was not at. And in the end, I think luckily he had like an ATM receipt that proved he wasn't there, but he had to go to court and fight for his liberty. But, if you're not Black, then you're, like maybe you're not a threat of that because you're not already on suspicion. And actually facial recognition systems just work very badly on dark skin tones because of the types of data that goes into it, because of the types of people building it. So there's plenty of people that we could be listening to and talking to now are pretty expert on what AI is already doing. And should be consulted, I think. But it might also just be that, you know, your kids in a school where they're using AI to monitor whether they're wearing their mask. There's AI programs to monitor whether the kids are cheating taking online exams, but they also don't work as well for darker skin tones. And what's that doing to a kid's mental health, and what's that? So it may just be that, you know, you're a parent of a child that's at the cutting edge of this AI stuff. Then you still have a voice, and you're still experiencing what AI does now and what it might do in the future. So I just want to encourage people to think about AI that's something that's already here and we're already experiencing, and think about it actively as technology, not a kind of superhuman being that's more powerful. We don't have to let it sort of passively happen to us. I want to see AI do well, and I want to see AI sort of bring us all more productivity, more prosperity, better health and well-being. But that's not going to happen by accident, and it's going to involve a much wider group of people to be involved in that discussion than currently are.
So my question is to do with what you'd said earlier around a lot of people in society and governments and organizations aren't going to do something because it doesn't do everything.
Mm-hmm.
Besides telling them that that's a flawed argument, how do you go about proving it, or kind of encouraging them to that something is better than nothing, and the status quo and where it's going to lead us is going to be far worse than, you know, an incremental gain, if that's all we can do for now, as we move on to something that solves everything in a kind of a utopian future?
Yeah, it's true. It's the internet example at the end of the book. I talk a lot about the creation of ICANN, which is this internet corporation for assigned names and numbers. Which, like, how is that? But actually, it's an incredibly important multi-stakeholder, non-governmental body that governs the entire domain name system of the internet. And this grew up organically and was supported by the US, and then it got caught in a lot of politics. And it's a story that goes from sort of Eisenhower all the way through to sort of Obama and his diplomats trying to basically rescue the open internet between 2012 and 2016, and just doing it in the nick of time, because the people who were opposed what they were doing were Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, who then obviously get into power. And had it been any later, if you want any more lesson in terms of how critical this stuff is, the entire open internet sort of depended on this. Anyway, so people say about ICANN, like, well, it only does the domain name system, but that's really important that it does the domain name system. Same with Warnock and the 14-day rule, same with the United Nations treaty. So my way of trying to explain it to people is by trying to show them historical examples and say, ground it in reality, because a lot of the AI conversation is not grounded in reality at the moment. It's grounded in theory and conjecture. And that was kind of the purpose of doing the book, is to sort of take the conversations that were happening there and sort of bring them down to earth somewhat. So it depends on who you're talking to, using examples that help them relate it in some way to the current world or the past world, rather than some far off future. A thing that I have found, I've been doing a lot of these talks over the past kind of 6 weeks, and a thing that I found that seems to really click and resonate with people when I talk to them about the fact that I know you're being told AI is all powerful and is automatically going to be better at human judgment and a bunch of things. But maybe we shouldn't just put all our trust in that. Is talking to them about the Post Office Horizon scandal, which is something that in the kind of the AI ethics world of thinking about and following for years, but has obviously hit home in the public consciousness now. How did we get to a situation where a company saw suddenly hundreds of its own employees who were kind of, you know, sub-postmaster pillars of their community in little villages and towns, and suddenly thought they'd all turn to a life of crime and imprison all of them, and think that was just accept that. That's an insane thing to have happened in so many different ways, so many different levels of failure. But one of the ways in which it's insane and awful is that the software says that they did it. and everyone believed them, and their lives were ruined. So I think you can kind of make it real to people by just helping them sort of understand and looking to history. But, that's my contribution. That's why I wrote the book, and I hope it helps people think about the fact that we are in a time of unique progress, but that progress itself is not unique. And we've, there are plenty of things that I'm worried about when it comes to AI, and you can read about them in the book. But overall, I feel optimistic about our kind of ability as human beings to manage that if more people get involved.
Okay, we had one more question, Ian.
What are you most hopeful about?
Well, I'm hopeful about humans. That's the thing about, somebody told me they read the book and they were like, oh, I'm excited about the technology. I think the technology is cool, but it actually made me think that humans are pretty great.
Yeah.
And was that your experience? Yeah. And that's, it's true. I do feel like that after having written it. So I'm hopeful about humanity, which is, hard every day, but on the whole. And in terms of AI, I think we have always needed science and technology to move us forward as a society. And I would much rather be living now than 50 years ago or 100 years ago for that reason. And so, someone said to me the other day, if you could go back in time to any time, where would you go? I was like, no, I would go forward, because I'm so excited about what we might be able to do with this technology in the future. It's actually that kind of excitement that makes me so disappointed when there isn't real sort of purpose and intentionality but behind it, and people kind of degrade it with some of the things that we're seeing lately. So it can be hard when you see deepfake pornography and lethal autonomous weapons and all of these kinds of things, to feel like the best of us is really winning in the AI debate. But I think it can, and it will eventually.
I'm going with the excited bit.
Let's go with that.
Yeah.
Hope is a choice sometimes.
Verity, you've been very generous in coming to spend time with us all today, and thank you very much to the audience. Please thank Verity.